Welcome, everyone. This is Elsie Kerns, your Chaos to Clarity coach. And tonight, I want to welcome you to our Phase 3 After the Tornado with Pam Younghans. And she is going to take us tonight from February through June 2020. She's also going to go back and review January a little bit for us. And you also will have the January calendar. And Pam won't be able to answer personal astrology chart questions, but if you put something in the chat that's general or relative to what we're seeing tonight, we'll try to get to that. We have a lot of ground to cover. And Pam will be offering a special to those people attending on her own personal private astrology readings. And we'll see that you get all that information in the replay link. The replay link will go out either later tonight or tomorrow, depending on how long it takes to download. You're going to receive a Zoom video, an audio in case you just want to listen to it. I'm also going to make it into a YouTube because everybody can easily access that. And these are all personal private links for those that have attended the webinar. You'll also get a PDF of the slideshow. Pam has made a beautiful, as always, PowerPoint slideshow, and you'll get that as well. So we're so happy to have Pam tonight. There's so much ground to cover that I'm going to turn it over right away to her. Pam, welcome.
Great. Thank you, Elsie. All right. Thanks, everybody. Really good to see everybody here. And thank you, as always, Elsie. The amount of work you put into this ahead of time is just phenomenal. And I'm so glad I don't have to do that, as well as preparing. It's just such a relief. And people send me emails and I just forward them on to Elsie, and I know that she handles it all. So I'm just really grateful to you for the part that you play in this, and the lovely intro as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so yes, I'm calling this Phase 3 because we're really in a 2-year process. Started in early 2019, and I've been dividing it up into 6-month sections, mostly just because that's when I do these classes. But the class last June really covered June through January, because December and January were really strongly linked energetically. And I also wanted everybody to kind of have that heads up for going into January, because it's been such a big deal. So we are now entering Phase 3, which is the first half of 2020, and Phase 4 will be the last half of 2020. So I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to talk about a little bit about the phases here. So that's just our lovely cover screen. And I am calling this After the Tornado because if you've been following astrology at all, what we've been looking at in January is a tornado, and not just a single tornado, but really the whole month has been really powerful in many, many ways. So this is that 2-year timeline. You can see these stars on the timeline, and that represents when there's planetary activity that's really significant. So you can see smack dab in the middle, January of 2020, that's the Saturn-Pluto alignment. It was not only Saturn and Pluto, it was the Sun and the Ceres and Mercury. It was just a really, and Chariklo, a whole bunch of planets together at the same degree of Capricorn. And it's the Saturn-Pluto piece that's the most significant, but having all those other planets jumping on the bandwagon too has made it even more powerful. So you'll see there's some highlighted areas as we go through this first 6 months, and then at the end of 2020 we have a major event again. So let's just take a quick review of what these are. In the bigger print are these 6 months. I'm including January just because we are going to look over it. This is just telling you what those stars on the timeline are, indicating significant events. So we'll be going over each one of these events, and I just give you that list so you know what the timeline is about. So I want to talk about January before we launch any further, because this is a lot of the effect of the Saturn-Pluto alignment. So they're in Capricorn. Capricorn rules systems and structures. Pluto has been revealing where there's weaknesses in those structures. It's been an agent of transformation, and Saturn has really brought it into our reality in a really strong way. So it's not only been, negative, what we would call negative events, also some positive ones, but looking at everything that's happened in January, and I didn't even, I finished this slideshow up a few days ago, so I don't have on here the coronavirus, which is another interesting piece of the puzzle. But the bushfires in Australia, and the floods in Indonesia, and the Puerto Rico earthquake, and volcanic eruptions in the Philippines and Japan and Mexico, and those are all within 3 days. So it's been a really powerful time. And then, my other little events here, certainly the impeachment proceedings going on in the US. And then this is cool. Pope Francis appointed a woman to a senior Vatican position, which either never happens or hasn't happened, but was a big headline. So again, a structural change. Not all structural changes are what we would perceive as negative. I put the knee here because Capricorn rules bones and joints, and especially the knee, and other structural parts of the bodies. And I know a lot of people have been having physical issues as well. But then on the positive side again, Microsoft made that announcement about their commitment to sustainability and to be carbon negative by 2030. And then this one here is Virginia ratifying the Equal Rights Amendment. So again, some very positive shifts going on, structural change. It's very clear that there's a lot going on. I put Meghan and Harry here because, their abdication. I don't know if they are officially calling it an abdication, but that's a big deal for the monarchy, for the system that is in place in the UK. And then I put in loving memory because I've known quite a few people who have passed in this last month. And I put Dorothy in the poppy field because, to me, one of the structures that seems to be in flux is our whole understanding of reality. And certainly the poppies and that scene in The Wizard of Oz, they were basically drugged by the poppy field. And I'm not saying that we're drugged, but really our whole perception of what's real. And I don't know if other people are feeling this too, but it's kind of like, what is real? I feel like I'm often between realities. And that was why I included that image. The last time we had a Saturn-Pluto alignment in Capricorn was in 1518. And the reason that's significant is that then there was also a big event that showed systemic weakness and was the beginning of structural change. And notice I say the beginning, structural change. But within 2 months of that alignment, when Martin Luther posted his 94 Theses to the church door, which was the beginning of the Protestant Reformation. And we know it as the 95 Theses, but I love that the full title was Disputation on the Power and Efficacy of Indulgences. So power is Pluto, efficacy is Saturn. So how perfect for that to be brought forward at the time of the Saturn-Pluto alignment back then. Now, yes, the Saturn-Pluto alignment is technically behind us, but there really is a ripple effect. You can't have an event this big and not have it affecting many, many months on either side. So really, we've been working with many of the manifestations of this alignment since last March 2019. Saturn and Pluto were already very close, and certainly we've seen a lot of buildup to the January events. And on the other side of it, we'll continue to see the ripple effect going out. And that's going to actually be a big part of what I'm going to talk about today, because there are significant times when that Saturn-Pluto alignment is going to be reactivated. So we'll look specifically at that. But where might we continue to see those structural changes? This is basically a list of what Capricorn rules. So we say that a sign rules, certain professions, certain areas of life. So this is just a fairly lengthy list of the kinds of areas of our lives, of our shared existence and our individual lives, where we might continue to see some of the systemic weaknesses and the structural realignments going on. So the next big event, which is one of the stars on our timeline, is the Jupiter-Pluto alignment. Now, actually, this is going to happen 3 times. The reason in 2020, the reason it can happen 3 times is because planets go forwards and backwards. And it's not a true, they don't really go backward. It's just that this retrograde motion, when it appears like they're going backward, is an optical illusion. It's just because our orbits are different sizes, and some are elliptical and some are more round than, between all of the planets. There's just a lot of variation. And so there can be times in our orbit where we're passing another planet in its orbit, and it's just a lot like passing a car on the freeway when, you're really going very close to the same speed, and yet while you're going past that other car, it looks like it's going backwards. It's just going slightly slower than you are, but it looks like it's going backwards. And that's really the retrograde effect. So we have 3 exact alignments. At each one of these alignments, we expect some kind of an activation. It's called a trigger in astrology. We say something triggers the energy. We would expect there would be some kind of next steps related back to the issues that we saw come forward in January with the Saturn-Pluto alignment. The Jupiter-Pluto process itself has 3 steps. So when they align in April 4th, the very first alignment, that is likely to be a time when something gets started. And we'll look at what those might be. June 29th, both planets are going retrograde. So it's a time for revising whatever was initiated in April. And then the last pass is November 12th, when, based on the revisions that we've made or based on what we've learned, we can then implement something about that's a part of this process for each of us individually. So okay, I think I may have said some of this already. It relates to issues from January. Jupiter is the great magnifier. So with it being in Capricorn, we expect that it would magnify our sense of purpose and that need to achieve something. It can also be a time when it feels like our responsibilities are really big, like there's just a lot to do. But then, since it's related to Pluto, and Pluto is that planet of transformation, Jupiter really magnifies that, accelerates that, exaggerates that. So around these times, we may see a lot of movement in these big shifts that are going on, in the awareness of the weaknesses of the structures being reconfigured, all of that. Now, we do have a shadow side of this. In the negative, Jupiter can magnify the ambition that's behind Pluto and the power plays that can come forward. Pluto, in some circumstances, can be very manipulative. It can represent an abuse of power. But that is the shadow side. With everything in astrology, there's always what we might call a positive and what we might call the shadow, and this is true of this as well. But I like Jupiter involved in this because, and this is why I chose the background for this slide that I'm using for representing Jupiter-Pluto, because Jupiter gives us the greater vision. It's seeing the greater vantage point, seeing the overall meanings. It's in Capricorn, so we have work to do. there's that piece of it involved. And certainly if we've climbed to this place in the mountains, we've had to work to get there. But Jupiter has that sense of being able to see the bigger picture. And so I think we all need to keep that in mind. Jupiter and Pluto do align every 13 years or so. Its last alignment was in December of 2007. So maybe you remember that time as being especially focused in some way. I know in my life it was, or really involved in something that was kind of all-consuming. That would be representing that Jupiter-Pluto alignment. So, okay, we've got somebody on with not being muted here.
Yeah, I'm just checking.
Okay.
¿Y dónde está? ¿Ya?
So I have everybody muted again. See what happens.
All right, great. Thank you, Elsie.
Right.
So another positive thing about Jupiter in Capricorn is that it's really going to help us apply what we've learned. Capricorn is very practical, very step-by-step oriented, focused on the goal, and Jupiter is expanding those qualities, so it's helping us move forward in many, many ways. What's very, very interesting is that even though Saturn and Pluto are not going to ever align exactly again, they're really not too far away from each other. So the big reveal of the 2020 is having Jupiter and Saturn and Pluto really all in close proximity throughout the year. And the last time Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto were this close in Capricorn was in 1894 BC. So how many years is, almost 4,000 years ago. So a very rare event. All right, let's see what my next slide is. Oh yeah, so this is very exciting to me. I'm going to unshare for just a moment, just to get a little variety. Hello. So each time Jupiter and Pluto align, so when they are at exactly the same degree of Capricorn, the asteroid Pallas Athena is right in the mix as well. So she's at least within a degree each time, so that April 4th and the June whatever and the November whatever, she's right there in the mix. And then on the very last alignment in November, all three, Jupiter, Pluto, and Pallas Athena, are at exactly the same degree. So I'm going to spend some time talking about Pallas Athena because I feel like she's really important. I love her personally. I'll talk more about her mythology, but she's very powerful. And so I'm very excited about her coming into the mix. So let's take a look at this. So in March and April, we have Jupiter and Pluto exactly aligned April 4th. Jupiter and Pallas are exactly aligned 7 days before. Pluto and Pallas are exactly aligned a couple of days before. So you can see this is all happening last week of March, first week of April. Same thing, June, July, the last week of June and the first week of July. All of this is very strong. And then this is the really cool part, is that all of these alignments happen on exactly the same degree in November. So there's a lot of energy infused into this Jupiter-Pluto alignment that to me is of a very positive nature. All right, so we need to look at positives and negatives, just because we need to look at how things might unfold. In the positive, Jupiter is idealism and optimism. So throwing that into the mix, and let's look at all the positive. And then Pluto is about regeneration and empowerment. And Pallas Athena is about creative wisdom and insight. So you get all those mixed together and you can say, wow, this is an incredibly powerful time. We're going to make ourselves, remake society, because this is all happening in Capricorn, which is about social structures, politics, governments, businesses. This is a huge possibility to come into a new manifestation of a really positive nature. So we want to really hold that intention. And we also need to realize that there are some negatives associated with this. So Jupiter in the negative can be extreme anything and indulgences. Interesting, that's the word from Martin Luther's posting about selling indulgences. I hadn't made that connection before just now. Pluto, can be very destructive. It's about power struggles, power abuse. Pallas Athena, it was actually really hard for me to find negatives associated with Pallas Athena, which is so cool. But I did find that she could be related to mental obsessions and fixations. So I do want to talk a bit briefly, remember my next slide, okay, before we go on to talk about Pallas, just want to tell you a little bit about the end of March and beginning of April, because this is going to be a really, really powerful time. So you already saw my list of having Jupiter and Pluto and Pallas Athena all joined together. But what's happening at the end of March, beginning of April, is that Mars is going to be at those degrees as well, all at the 25th degree of Capricorn. So we can say that these planets in Capricorn are really working together to help us make that next evolutionary step. Jupiter is magnifying everything that's been exposed through the Saturn-Pluto alignment. It's also making it very clear where we need to dismantle, where we need to rewrite what has been and what needs to be cleared so that we can move forward unfettered by what has come before. Pluto is the rototiller. Pluto goes down the row and digs out the roots of the weeds, and then it usually goes back across the same place and digs further down. And that's, of course, what it's going to be doing this year as it goes forward and then retrograde and then forward again. But it's digging out those weeds that have been strangling the life force from the plants that we actually want to grow, the new forms. So the rototiller process, as painful as it might be, or as scary as it might be at times, it really is an important part of it all. Now, Mars is the principle of action, also the god of war. I hope that it doesn't magnify some of those issues in that end of March, beginning of April timeframe. The positive of this is that ability to really take charge of a situation and to see what needs to be done and to take action towards it. So there is a very positive side of it. One of the cool things about Pallas is that what I've read about her is that she has the ability to see how things need to come together. So she's like able to take jigsaw puzzle pieces and put them together to create solutions. And while she's in Capricorn, it's about providing insights to right timing. So that's one of her gifts here. When we combine Pallas and Jupiter in Capricorn, we have a greater access to our innate wisdom, especially about political and social issues, and perhaps especially in the area of women's rights, because Pallas Athena is, of course, a female figure, Jupiter and Pluto being masculine figures. And so I like having her in the mix for that as well. And then when Pallas and Pluto align, it's that empowerment to create the new forms that Pallas can envision. So it's our opportunity to replace outdated structures. And to me, it also, I keep thinking, well, isn't there a woman coming forward somewhere? And maybe it's one of the women who's already prominent, who comes forward with a stronger voice or takes charge in some way. That's entirely possible. But we're going to talk in a bit about Venus going retrograde. And with Venus retrograde, that's supposed to be people from the past coming forward. So I'm just curious about how that's all going to play out. But working together. So we've been talking about these three, Jupiter, Pluto, and Pallas. So I wrote down, they're activating our capacity to grasp deeper meanings, so the Jupiter side of it, to envision a better future, which is Pallas, to claim a heightened ethical perspective, which is very Capricorn, as well as the power to transform political, legal, and social institutions that are no longer viable. And that's the Pluto piece. So there really is a lot of positive potential in all of this. But of course, what we're seeing right now is the crumbling part, the weeds being rooted out. All right, so let's get a better idea of Pallas Athena. So I don't know what the artist is. This was on a website that I pulled up. Pallas Athena is about wisdom, creativity, artistry, healing power, feminine power. Like I said before, she has the ability to see patterns and solve problems. She is the goddess of wisdom, the goddess of healing, the goddess of the strategy of war. But from what I've read about her, she would never choose war. She would always choose first to reason things through or to find solutions on another level. And while she's in Capricorn, she's of course focused on very practical solutions. She's especially efficient and organized. And so we have the capacity to tap into that energy. So if you want to put a statue, an image of Pallas Athena on your altar, that might be a great thing to do. So in my book, Dimitri George has a book on asteroids, and what she says about Pallas Athena, especially being in Capricorn, she says Capricorn is a very strong placement for Pallas, and that that she has the ability to formulate precise structures into which raw creative energy can coalesce. So that has a lot of words that have to kind of come together in our minds, but I think you get the feeling of it, that this is a really powerful opportunity for us. I'm just looking at my notes to see if there's anything else I want to pull out about her. Oh, this is another thing I read about her. She has the ability to understand complex communications. She understands and picks up unspoken and subliminal messages. So this is very cool in and of itself, but I also will talk in a few minutes about the fact that the nodal axis is changing signs. The North Node is actually going into Gemini. I'll explain what that means a little bit more. But Gemini is all about communication and right communication. And so Pallas Athena is really helping us with that direction in our evolutionary development as well. So we know from ancient art that Pallas Athena has two animal totems. She has the owl and the snake. The sculptures show her with an owl on her shoulder and the serpents of wisdom wrapped around her feet. So, you know, if you're looking for spirit guides to work with this year, either one of these would be a great companion. I especially like owl. There's actually an owl calling in my yard last night. And owl has this ability to see form in the darkness. And so we can call on that when it feels like things are fearful or things are dark or we're only seeing the shadow side. Calling on owl, calling on Pallas Athena to help us see the bigger picture, to help us see the forms that are trying to come forward. And then with the snake, there's also the capacity to shed the skin and to come out as a new being. So these are the wise advisors we can call on as we're working this year. Okay, so I can hope you can feel how excited I am about Pallas Athena being the mix. I think she's going to make a big difference in how all of this unfolds for us. She just adds a different energy to the puzzle. And what I keep picturing is that, okay, we've got Jupiter and Pluto sitting at the conference table because this is Capricorn, so they're very businesslike, really wanting to get the job done. And, you know, male energies and really kind of jawing it out. But then Pallas Athena standing in and being the wise advisor. That's why I put those words on that image with the owl. She's there as the wise advisor, so all we have to do is to look to her. She's not as strong an energy as Jupiter or Pluto, but she's a very strong image, very strong persona, and she's there for us to utilize and to work with throughout this time. So another exciting thing that's happening this year is Saturn is going to change signs. Saturn's in a sign for about 2 to 2.5 years, so it's been in Capricorn for about that long. This year it's going to go into Aquarius. That's another thing that happens at the end of March, another big event. So end of March is starting to look pretty big. Then Saturn will go retrograde in May, I believe it is. So it'll exit, go back into Capricorn. Then it'll go direct, I believe it's in September, and enter Aquarius one more time in December. And that will be its permanent residence for the next couple of years until 2023. So let's take a look at what, first of all, we get to see the lovely owl again. I love this photo. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about Saturn. Okay, so Saturn enters Aquarius March 21st, goes retrograde, backs up into Capricorn, and then goes back into Aquarius. So those are the dates that I had just mentioned. So what's interesting is the various ways that Saturn in Aquarius can manifest. So I've listed some of the ones here that feel pertinent to me. We know that Aquarius is an individualistic sign. It can be rebellious. It's very independent, very progressive. So with Saturn in Aquarius, we can see authority of the individual being very important. And again, the light and the shadow of it, power to the people or the denial of individual rights. In a positive, but also a negative, it can be get some better detachment from the emotional overwhelm, but we also have to make sure not to get so detached that we become aloof and unfeeling. In the positive, there can be great social and scientific progress. There are going to be some tests of the group dynamics. Can we really work together? And can we work together to achieve humanitarian goals, which are very Aquarian? We might see organized revolt, but certainly inventive new forms. So the last time that Saturn was in Aquarius, it's going to be in a sign every 29 to 30 years or so. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the events of those dates. But before I go there, a couple more things on a more personal level. You know, the things I've listed here with Saturn in Aquarius are kind of more socially oriented. But on a personal level, we might be needing more alone time, just the space around us. It's really an important time for a mindfulness practice. It can help us access a greater self-awareness. It is a test of isolationism. And again, what I mentioned earlier, do we choose social consciousness or do we choose a more aloof stance? So of the two dates that were most recent, so 62, 64, I just went back and looked at the list of events over those couple of years and pulled out the ones that felt very in keeping with Saturn in Aquarius. So in 62, 64, so President Kennedy proclaimed that the US would put the man on the moon by the end of the decade, and certainly we did. But that was very Saturn in Aquarius. You know, Aquarius, very progressive, and Saturn saying, we're going to do this. It was also the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis. So kind of a misfiring of the not quite sure of how to use authority in a proper way. That's my opinion of it. Martin Luther King Jr. was leading civil rights protests. This is the time frame where he gave his famous I Have a Dream speech. So we can see a lot of that Saturn in Aquarius energy there. The Equal Pay Act was signed into law. There were protests against racial segregation in the schools. President Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. There's a lot of civil disobedience. I grew up in the Bay Area in California, and I was very aware of all the sit-ins in Berkeley, and I know my parents wouldn't let us go to Berkeley or Oakland for several years. But all of that demonstration for individual rights and for free speech. So that to me is very Saturn in Aquarius. So we may again see some of those kind of manifestations in the years ahead. Then 91, 93, that was actually when the Soviet Union actually dissolved. Interesting too, Ross Perot ran for US president as an independent, which really threw out divided one of the parties, and it really changed the outcomes of the election. On a disturbing note, this was also when there was the beating of Rodney King. For those of you who are old enough to remember, it was police brutality, and that certainly the power to the people and the denial of individual rights, because that situation, that event, really was troubling and took on such a life of its own, and it really started the LA riots. So it was a very big time, but very much Saturn in Aquarius. Interesting, this is when the Church of England approved ordination of female priests. And it was also when black and white leaders worked together in South Africa to approve the new democratic constitution. So, and one of the dates we particularly want to watch is again at the end of March, because Saturn has entered Aquarius on March 21st. Mars has completed its journey through Aquarius and actually aligns with Saturn on the very last day of the month, on March 31st. So it's going to be interesting to watch that date and see what kinds of events related to what we've just been talking about might occur. All right, I briefly want to talk about retrogrades. Mercury will go retrograde. I think most people are pretty familiar with that. It happens, 3 times at least a year. It happens every 4 months. So these are the dates that are pertinent to our discussion today. During these times, we want to reassess our plans. We want to reassess decisions. We want to review information. It's said to be best to be cautious in areas of communication, travel, and legal matters. My feeling about it is just don't rush things. The only time I've had a problem during a Mercury retrograde was when I was trying so hard to get a decision made the night before Mercury retrograde, and it blew up in my face, and it was something that didn't settle then for 2 years. So I've really learned to just take your time. That's why they say, double check, read the fine print, do all of that if you're trying to make decisions or do anything during a Mercury retrograde period. Life goes on during Mercury retrograde. It doesn't stop. People make decisions all the time, but just take your time, breathe into it, use that kind of common sense about it. And then we do have Venus going retrograde, which only happens once every 2 years. So this will be from May to June, and we want to especially watch the June 3rd time frame, because that's when the sun will exactly align with Venus. So what is Venus retrograde about? Again, it's, takes on some of that flavor that we understand from the Mercury retrograde time. It's a time to reassess relationships, reassess what we value. It's also a time when relationships from the past may resurface, or we can be thinking a lot about those past relationships and wanting to get at the real reasons for why they succeeded or failed. Since this is all happening in Gemini, we want to especially pay attention to the themes of communication. Did I speak my truth? Was I able to hear what the other person was saying? Is this what has been a problem? How do I learn to do this two-sided communication? We think of Gemini and we think about communication, but remembering that Gemini is the twins. There's always somebody listening and somebody speaking, and hopefully they're taking turns there. Relationships that start during this time I feel especially fated or karmic. But you do want to be cautious, again, remembering what Mercury retrograde taught us. You want to be cautious in areas of romance, finances, and beautification. These are the areas that Venus rules, because we may not see another person clearly. Easier to have a change of heart later. And we may not really have clarity in lots of ways. We may not know whether we can trust ourselves or trust others. So it can be a little bit more problematic. And people might appear to be more kind of selfish or withdrawn and self-protective, just because we all have that sense of kind of going inward. It is a good time to plan budgets or to plan a wedding, but not actually to buy things or get married, according to the astrological wisdom. So we want to avoid weddings, large purchases, cosmetic surgery if possible. Don't redecorate, don't throw parties, just because they might not go as planned or expected. But again, remembering the lesson from Mercury, just take your time, be clear, and everything can go fine. And just use this time to really dive into this reassessment, especially if you're someone who really wants to explore the theme of relationships in life or what you really value. This is a perfect time to be doing that. And then, like I said, what's interesting is that Pallas Athena goes retrograde on May 17th. She'll be retrograde until September, so a much longer time. But we've got this whole, at least 4 weeks when both Venus and Pallas are retrograde. And so that really makes me think again, well, where is that feminine voice, maybe from the past, or that's been hidden until now? And how are we going to access it within ourselves? And does it come forward in our world in some way? All right. So another thing that happens this year is that the nodal axis will shift signs. So what the heck does that mean? So we have a north node and a south node. They're always exactly opposite each other, so in opposite signs of the zodiac. And they stay in a pair of signs for about 18 months. And then they actually go backwards, so they shift into the previous sign. So we've been working with North Node in Cancer and South Node in Capricorn. So we've really been seeing an evolutionary push into positive Cancer qualities, because that's what the North Node represents. The North Node represents how we're meant to be evolving for our highest growth. And South Node generally shows the shadow side of the sign that it is in, as a way of saying, don't get stuck here, go towards the North Node. So, we still have the South Node in Capricorn right now until May, and North Node in Cancer. So we're still seeing, some of the shadow side of Capricorn, the overbearing authority, the struggles, the, might is right kind of energy, really been emphasized again also through Saturn and Pluto being in Capricorn, but this is still very prominent. And North Node in Cancer is about really learning to access our hearts, to learn to be empathetic rather than judgmental, and to learn to care for each other. So we're still in that for a while, but it's going to be interesting to see what happens with the shift of the nodes, because let's take a look at the next evolutionary steps that this represents. So you can, if you attended my last classes, you see a very similar image. I had this up for moving from Capricorn to Cancer, but this is showing how we move from the shadow side of Sagittarius to the positive side of Gemini. So these are the traits: moving from self-righteousness to tolerance, choosing impartiality over being dogmatic, being willing to question instead of being gullible or just accepting at face value, moving from some kind of a more fanatical approach to more rational approach. Sagittarius can be a little aloof sometimes, whereas Gemini is, questioning and curious. Sagittarius can be, now remember, this is all the shadow side of Sagittarius. So if you are a Sagittarius or have strong Sagittarius in your chart, this is only the shadow side. Every sign has a shadow side, and Sagittarius has a lot of positive. It's only because the South Node is in Sagittarius that we're looking at that shadow side. So this is just the list that you might want to keep handy and say, okay, well, how am I choosing those qualities on the right side of this dynamic? There is one other thing I want to talk about before we go to the calendars, and that is when planets go out of bounds. So let me explain this for a minute first. So stop share. Okay, so we have this celestial equator, which is really taking the, this is as I understand it, taking the Earth's equator and extending it out into space. Now it doesn't do that, it's very imaginary kind of thing, but that's called the celestial equator. So mostly we see the planets kind of going along that celestial equator in their orbits. However, they can go a little bit further afield at times, and that's called the declination. There's a certain degree. If they go beyond a certain declination, a certain number of degrees away from that celestial equator, we call them out of bounds. So an out of bounds planet is important because it acts kind of as a wild card. As I'm thinking about this, I keep thinking of the, I don't even remember what movie is it, Dr. No? I don't know, wherever the cowboy was riding the missile. I can't remember the movie it is. Anyway, just kind of a crazy man. Just kind of out of the box, out of bounds. That's the energy. So when a planet is out of bounds, we tend to see more of those kind of eccentric qualities coming forward. In positive terms, it can be very innovative, original, freedom-loving. Can also be disregard for the law, disregard for behavior norms, disregard for social standards. So that's what it means when a planet is out of bounds. So we can see Mars goes out of bounds February 9th to March 2nd. This is the one that tends to get most people's attention because we think, well, Mars is the god of war. Oh my gosh, if it's going out of bounds, crazy things will happen. Not necessarily. It can be, taking action in very inventive ways, all of that. In the positive, very bold, confident, courageous, good willpower, passionate, daring, risk-taking, good leadership ability. Those are the positives. But it can also bring out the aggressive side, bullying, too rash, too angry, too selfish, too forceful, too belligerent, kind of the beyond what we would hope people would do, again, beyond the law, beyond the social standards. But there's also a positive related to it. Venus will be out of bounds from April 2nd to June 1st. Oh, and just to let you know, Mars goes out of bounds about one time a year. So it's not like it never happens, but one time a year, and affects how we assert ourselves and our self-conscious, our self-confidence. Venus goes out of bounds once or twice a year. In our time period, it's April 2nd to June 1st. It affects how we relate to others and what we enjoy or find pleasurable. So in the positive, we can, really be seeking harmony and pleasure in new ways. Really expanding our understanding of music and the arts, trying new things in these areas, able to appreciate beauty in ways that we'd never seen before. And the negative, excessive indulgence, materialism, snobbery, that kind of thing, and extravagance. And then Mercury actually goes out of bounds 3 times this year. Some of them are the last one is beyond our scope, but it's already finished one of those times. The positives are new way of thinking. People may be especially eloquent, pulling on new words, more charismatic in speech, a talent for using the media. And in the negative, really odd ways of communicating that we can't understand well, exaggeration, tendency to misunderstand each other, and kind of compulsive thinking. Okay, so we're going to launch into the calendars next. I'm going to take some tea, and I want to ask Elsie if there's any questions or if she has any thoughts she wants to share.
I don't have any questions up there, but I'm
Okay.
fascinated by the amazing things that are coming up, and I especially love all the information about Pallas Athena. She just sounds magical. Magical.
I love her. I love her
Yeah.
so much. She's really, if you ever explore her, find her in your birth chart. To me, she really represents where we have an innate skill, an innate gift. And yeah, it can bring up challenges if we have it in hard aspect to other planets, that maybe interfere with our finding that gift right away. But it still means that we've got a gift. And I just love that about her. She's so smart, and she's so strong and very brave. And I've always loved her. So anyway.
Yeah. Wait a
Right.
minute. I just did get one question.
Okay.
Andrea asked, do our birth charts add yet another layer to this information?
Perfect. Yes.
If
Oh,
so, are you ready for a request for consult? So Andrea, you will have a chance to make a personal appointment with Pam. I'll send all that information out. And I also have another question from Elvie asking, how can I get the slides to print? So I just want everyone to know that we will provide all the slides in the replay, a PDF of the slides that Pam is showing. And Belinda asks, what do you feel will be the most challenging part of the year? Looks like the whole year is so
well, to me, just to take the last question first,
yeah.
I really feel like the end of March and beginning of April are going to be kind of big.
Okay.
That's the first Jupiter-Pluto alignment. Mars is there too. That's right when Saturn goes into Aquarius. So there's a shift of energy, and I love Aquarius as a sign, but it's, Saturn's been in Capricorn and trying to hold the status quo. And Aquarius is, if you know the symbol for Aquarius, it's two lines going up and down. And it's not an unstable sign, but it represents change and newness and progress. And, it's kind of like stepping off. I'm thinking of the Fool card in the tarot, where you see the young man with the dog and they're just stepping off the edge of the precipice. And that's a little bit of that Aquarian feel to me. So to have that happening at the same time as Mars aligns with Jupiter and Pluto and Pallas, but then Mars also aligns with Saturn as soon as it enters Aquarius, that just feels like a really powerful time to me. So that's where my focus is as far as saying, wow. It's also when we have planets that have three connections, as we do with the Jupiter-Pluto alignment, it's often the first one where we get kind of the big push. Think of it as being, if you're going to swim in a pool that isn't heated. So the first step into the pool is you're feeling so cold you can hardly stand it. But once you've been in there for a while, it feels warm. You're kind of used to the energy, and that's how we get used to these energies as they occur over time. However, I've also seen it true in my life. I don't know why that has been, that it's been the middle pass when both planets are retrograde, that there's been effect in my life specifically, and maybe that's because their effect goes deeper and touches us more deeply. That's possible too. And then there's a third possibility that we build with each with each alignment, we build April, June, and then November's the big reveal. But there's no way of knowing which is which. But I do feel like end of March is really powerful. So yeah, that question. And then as far as, wow, well, our individual charts, how does this tie into that? And this also goes back to somebody's question at the beginning, that she was talking about Saturn and Pluto being in her 10th house. So yes, wherever wherever all this stuff is happening, wherever we have like 23, 24 degrees of Capricorn in our chart, this is a huge focus of energy in that part of our chart. So it takes knowing your chart. It takes knowing what the different houses mean. I do have a list of what the different houses are, what they represent on my website. So you can always check that out. There are lots of great resources online as well. But yeah, so for instance, 10th house is career and sense of purpose and how we see ourselves and our goals and all of that. So we would think, oh, somebody having Pluto, Saturn, and all this alignment happening there, this would be the focal area of their lives. So I hope that's helpful. Okay, so let's dive into the calendars. And as usual, I'll probably go a little long. I hope everybody's okay with that. If you have to leave the meeting, you know, at exactly 5:30 my time, please do, and you'll have the full recording when you choose to listen to it later. Okay. Okay. Oh, big reveal. Okay, I just was playing around with graphics. It was kind of fun. Okay, so yes, we're done with January, but I really wanted to show you this because look at all of the curly cues. So, and you can see right around this time especially, so much was going on. So I wanted to reference that specifically to say, yes, you're not making things up, you're not imagining things. January has been quite intense. And we kind of also we already did the review with that little thumbnail page of some of the events that were going on. Yeah, so yeah. Okay, so let's go on to February. And I wanted to notice right away, look at, woohoo, only one curly cue. So it's not that nothing's going to happen in February. Remember that image of the Saturn-Pluto alignment with the rock dropping in the water and the ripples going out. So it's not like, oh, we're all done with it. It really is a part of our energy for most of 2020. And like I said before, it's really going to be triggered again when Jupiter aligns with Pluto. But let's go ahead and take a look at February. So I don't know if I can get rid of, if I get rid of this, will I get rid of everything? I'm afraid to put this away, but it's kind of blocking the screen.
Yeah.
What happens if I do that put away? Oh, hide thumbnail video. Oh, all right. Okay, good. That's better. Okay, so, and a couple of notes. I'm not going to talk about every single transit, every single aspect that's listed. We'd be here forever if I did. And also to notice that not all of them are equally weighted. The faster moving planets, the energy of their interactions are going to last for a day or two or three. But once we start going out from there, especially Mars is a little bit more slow, Jupiter certainly slower, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. When they start getting involved, we have influences that last for longer. So like around the time, the days of the Jupiter-Pluto alignment, we're looking at a couple of weeks on either side of that exact date when that energy is very strong. So let's just take a look at this. February 3rd, Mercury enters Pisces. I like this. It softens mental activity. It increases our capacity for meditation and the dream state, intuition. On Friday the 7th, Venus enters Aries, and that helps us be more assertive in our relationships, helps us know what we value. But also on that same day, Uranus is square Ceres, and Ceres has to do with family. And so there is a little bit of here of breaking free from parental influence or restlessness with family obligations. So together we've got Venus in Aries, which is a more assertive kind of independent sign, Uranus squaring Ceres. So this is not a day to feel like, oh, I'm just going to settle in at home and be with family. It's more like, oh, what can I do that's new and different that, you know, reminds me that I'm an individual. And that's the day before the full moon. Full moons are always, you know, kind of a bigger emotional event. But this one, the full moon is actually in a nice aspect to Mars, so it supports our taking action on creative endeavors. It's in Leo. It's also at the point of a yod. I won't explain a yod right now, but a yod is a configuration that represents the need for an adjustment. So we look at, oh, well, what is the adjustment that's needed? Again, we look at the shadow side of Leo. Well, if we're too self-absorbed or too prideful or too needy of attention, that could be the adjustment that might be needed. And if we can make that adjustment, we can really tap into that creative fire that is a part of a Leo full moon. I did mention that Mars will be out of bounds from starting February 9th. Oh, I wrote down that Annie Oakley had Mars out of bounds. If you know who Annie Oakley was, Annie, get your gun. So she was certainly a wild woman and out of the norm. And I just like her as representing a little bit about what Mars out of bounds can be like. Yeah, Venus conjunct Chiron, that's nice for healing in relationships. It's an opportunity to start anew. Conjunction is always an ending of a cycle and a beginning of a new cycle. Let's see, the 16th, Mars enters Capricorn, Mercury goes retrograde. So Mars is now the planet to watch because now it's in Capricorn and it's going to reactivate many of the Saturn-Pluto issues. And the Mercury retrograde is going to have us looking in the rearview mirror as well. Sun enters Pisces. This is an opportunity to do our wrap-up of the year. The astrological year starts with the equinox in March. And the last month of the astrological year is about release, letting go, surrender, all of what we think of with Pisces. Friday, opportunity to make some good progress in some ways, but we also may need to overcome a lack of self-confidence. Got Mars in good aspect to Uranus, but then in hard aspect to Chiron. So it's kind of a mixed bag there. But I think once we get over those fears, insecurities, we have a lot of energy to move forward, both Friday and Saturday. Our new moon on the 23rd is in Pisces. It's actually at the midpoint, so halfway between Mars and Uranus, which is kind of exciting because this is very innovative. So this new lunar cycle is especially dynamic, progressive, and yet it's in Pisces, so maybe some of this progress is in spiritual realms or creative realms. These are the areas that Pisces rules. This can be a very visionary time. So setting that up as your purpose as a part of the new lunar cycle, into a new vision. Also, since Pisces rules film, it's a great time for a new movie to appear that kind of pushes our understanding of reality.
That's yours.
Okay, I'm hearing some voices in the background.
Sure. Yeah, I'm checking here. Huh.
I'm not hearing it anymore, so.
Yeah, I have everybody muted, yeah.
Okay, and you can still hear me though? Okay. So the one curly Q day is the 25th, when Mars is conjunct the South Node. So this is happening in Capricorn. This is a curly Q day because it's going to bring forward some of probably the negative sides of Mars and Capricorn. So this is the might makes right kind of theme. So be careful on an individual level of falling into old dynamics of anger, aggression, control issues. All of that could be problematic around, really that entire week, just because Mars moves more slowly than some of the other planets. This is also the day that Sun is aligning with Mercury, but remember, Mercury is retrograde, so it's a day to go within, and a day to figure out our inner motivations. And then towards the end of the week here, Venus runs into some problems. Going to be conjunct Eris. Eris is a very disgruntled goddess. She was not invited to a party, so she ended up starting starting the Trojan War. That's part of her mythology. And then Venus is squaring Pluto on the 28th. So it's kind of a contentious time here when there's a push-pull, resentments coming forward. So not the best time to try to resolve issues. However, if there are issues that need to come to the surface, Pluto is that rototiller, remember? And so it will be very happy to help you weed things out. So from our one curly Q month, we now go to Mars, and you can see, especially towards the end of the month, that we have quite a lineup again. All right, so I need some tea to start with this. So we talked about the end of February being some issues in relationship. That really continues through the first part of March, because we have Venus squaring Saturn there on the 3rd. Remember, Venus is in Aries, so it's that part of us that, you know, wants to be assertive, wants to be individualistic, and Saturn is saying, well, does that really work in your current relationship? So this is an opportunity for us to say, wow, you know, Saturn is usually a reality check. Let's see, Mercury returns to Aquarius, kind of going back there to help us remember to think outside the box. Let's see, the next week we've got 2 conjunctions on Sunday the 8th. This is a very spiritual, creative, visionary time. It can also be kind of evasive or elusive, just because Neptune is, you know, more mysterious at times, and Uranus can be a little rebellious or a lot rebellious. So this is really a day to more be in your own space and do your own thing and meditate or go where you want to go. It's that kind of energy. Or to, if you're going to connect with somebody, do something new, do something out of the box. We have the full moon on the 9th, which is in Virgo. It's also the day that Mercury goes direct. So at this full moon, the moon is opposite Neptune. So it's really asking us to find a balance between the practical and the mystical, between the need to plan all the details, which is Virgo, or surrender to the flow, which is Neptune in Pisces. But moon is in positive aspect to Mars, Pallas Athena, Jupiter, and Pluto. So this is cool. I love this about this moon. We have strong powers of discernment with Pallas in there. Opportunity to take informed action based on an awareness of patterns, Mars and Pallas. So this is very powerful full moon to see the lay of the land, to get the bigger picture, and to have some clearer ideas on where we need to go next. All right, in next week, Mercury goes back into Pisces. So again, we've got that linking between our conscious minds that Mercury represents with our high heart, so we communicate with compassion and open more easily to our soul's insights and guidance. Then we get Mars conjunct Pallas. I didn't put a curly Q on that day. I like Pallas Athena. I think she's going to keep things kind of moving forward. But then Mars conjunct Jupiter, Mars square Eris, on the same day that Saturn enters Aquarius, and then on the 22nd, Mars conjunct Pluto, and then the new moon, which it just kind of is, it's the, what is it? Oh, the snowball rolling down the hill that just continues to gather more girth. This is why I'm kind of looking at the end of March and saying, oh my gosh, there's a lot going on. So we've already talked a lot about this alignment stuff and Mars triggering the Saturn-Pluto stuff. It's triggering the Jupiter part. So let me see what I wrote in my notes. Powerful time this week and next. So all of this week and through the end of the month. Mars triggers the Saturn-Pluto alignment, activates Pallas and Jupiter and Eris. Because Mars is the god of war, we may see antagonisms, power struggles, grasping for control. Remember, Mars in Capricorn is the general of the army and kind of determined to take that next hill. We're going to talk more about equinox on the next slide. I've talked a little bit about Saturn entering Aquarius. And this is our first introduction to those energies, remember. So during the next 2 years, social systems will go through tremendous change. And we get that the fourth full week of the month, Mars conjunct Pluto. Again, more manifestations related back to January. We have the potential for some concrete action, but it can be very contentious too. Pluto is about power. Mars is very assertive. We get those together, and it can, in a positive way, on an individual level, we can say, yes, I'm going to do this. I feel passionate about it. I'm going to go forward. I'm going to take these risks. This is what I want to do. That's the positive energy behind it. Our new moon on the 24th, it's in Aries. It's actually conjunct Chiron. As you can see, the next day the sun is conjunct Chiron, so aligned with Chiron. So this is a very important lunar cycle for healing the inner wounded warrior. That's Chiron is in Aries right now. So we're all healing our ability to take risks, our ability to feel self-confident, to deal with fears, and to come out the other side. And remember that, false bravado hides deep insecurities. And it's often true that the louder the voice, the smaller the self-assurance. All right, then we start the Jupiter triggers here. Jupiter squaring Eris on the 26th. Jupiter conjunct Pallas on the 28th. So Jupiter stepping into the mix in a more obvious way. There are perhaps struggles of belief systems, people being more judgmental, big battle between what's right and what's wrong. But then with Jupiter conjunct Pallas, there is that wise advisor who's ready and willing to assist us. And our ability to tap into her is heightened now because Jupiter makes things bigger. So I always think that there's kind of this light shining on events. And again, Pallas Athena is kind of our saving grace. Then the very end of the month, Mars enters Aquarius on the 30th, and it aligns with Saturn on the 31st, on the same day that Pluto aligns with Pallas Athena. So the big emphasis here is on where we're going instead of on where we've been. Events around now should give us some clues as to what Saturn and Uranus has up its sleeve for us over the next couple of years. Mars is active, Saturn's very determined. When they come together and working together well, we know when to apply the gas and when to apply the brake. And looking at the positive Pluto conjunct Pallas, this could be an empowered feminine voice, a voice of reason, harnessing power and wisdom to achieve the goals of transformation. So yeah, I think there's a lot of challenging energies, but we've also got a lot of potential. So the equinox is on the 19th. These circles show the focus here. And the equinoxes and solstices are said to set the energy for the next 3 months. So we've got Sun conjunct Chiron. We've got that healing theme, similar to the energies of the new moon, healing the inner warrior. So perhaps it is telling us that in order for us to navigate these changing times successfully, we must each look within to see where fears and insecurities are undermining us. Self-care continues to be very important. Even more important is inner child work, where we pay loving attention to the part of us that acts and reacts out of fear. And as we heal, we can shift the energies of the Jupiter-Pluto alignment from the dark spectrum to the light. We got the stellium in Capricorn, all of these planets here. So yes, everything we've been dealing with continues very strongly in our awareness throughout the next 3 months. So that's the theme. I also have Moon Ceres square Venus. It just indicates a conflict that's possible between our personal needs and fulfillment and the requirements of home, family, or homeland even. The bigger version of home. All right, let's look at April. All right, so April's got a few curly cues. Venus enters Gemini. This is the sign it's in when it goes retrograde, so this will be interesting to watch. It's usually in a sign for about a month. It'll be in Gemini for about 4 months. And it thrives on intelligent and witty conversation, easily bored or distracted when a conversation becomes circular or dull. This is about seeking new and interesting relationships. And it really makes us aware of when we're not feeling intellectually stimulated by companions. Mercury is also aligned with Neptune on that day. It can be really hard to concentrate on practical concerns on Friday, but it really does enhance any kind of mystical, spiritual, creative activities that evening. However, we do have Jupiter conjunct Pluto for the first time on that Saturday. We've talked a lot about that. The process of deep transformation that's been in our awareness since early 2019 now seems to accelerate, or we may just be more deeply aware of the level of change that's occurring. Our full moon on the 7th. That's the same day that Mars squares Uranus. So we've already got some strong rebellious energies. People are kind of unpredictable under this, maybe rebellious. Just be careful around these dates with Mars squaring Uranus, just because we can trip more easily, literally or figuratively. And with a full moon also, emotions are usually heightened, which is why this is a curly-Q day. The full moon actually is in Libra, and it's in square aspect, hard aspect to Pluto and Jupiter. So it's asking us to find a new balance between self and other. So it can be a little disruptive and reactive around that time. Mercury enters Aries. We are more assertive and energetic in our communications, easier to speak our truth, maybe not as tactful as we might want to be, however. All right, now the Sun gets in the mix. This is why these are curlicues. Sun is aligned with Eris, and then squares Pluto, and square Jupiter, and then on Friday squares Pallas Athena. So that week is a pretty powerful one. We, again, are getting a lot of triggering from the Sun. Sun always brings light to something. It shines a light on something, highlights it, and so we're likely to see, this is kind of the secondary. You know, if we're looking at the end of March as being big time, I would call this a secondary kind of time frame, really all of that week and into the early next week, because then we have Sun squaring Saturn also. So issues that have been simmering could come to a boil. The Sun-Jupiter square especially, there can be a dissonance between our individual agendas and the perspective held in mass consciousness. So a very important time to be clear on what isn't yours, what fears aren't yours, what anger isn't yours, really tapping internally, finding out where your center of peace is and aligning with that. That's going to be very important at that time. Next week, Sun enters Taurus and then squares Saturn right away. So, you know, Taurus likes things to be the same, and clearly we're in a very changing time. And Saturn is in Aquarius, so Sun squaring Saturn says, oh my gosh, there's too many changes going on for my Taurus self to understand or to really conceptualize. So just remember that there are purposes, there are reasons for things. I think the fears come up when really we realize there's no longer a status quo that we can define as we used to. We have our Aries new moon. The reason it's a curlicue is because it is in hard aspect to Pluto and Jupiter. So again, igniting, relighting some of the flames that have already been building here. And especially important is the fact that Pluto goes retrograde on the 25th, on the same day that Mercury squares Pluto. So when a planet comes to its station, and it's either going to go retrograde or direct, it's basically standing still for a while, basically at the same degree. So Pluto, you know, if we think about it, really has been at the same degree since early in April, maybe since the 12th, and then it's exactly at a standstill on the 25th. So that really increases this powerful energy of this time as well. Every time we see a Pluto transit, it's kind of magnified. And then to have Mercury squaring Pluto on the same day it goes retrograde. This is kind of the truth lies in videotape kind of scenario. Can be strong verbal power struggles, time where more things are revealed that were concealed. Secrets and identities can be unmasked. And it's interesting, well, I won't go there. Mercury then, we've got Sun conjunct Uranus. Oh, this is what I forgot. Okay, on the 25th, it should also say Mercury squaring Jupiter. I just neglected to put that in there. So again, it's kind of exaggerating the disinformation. So take everything with a grain of salt and check your facts. Saturn conjunct Uranus on the 26th. This is kind of a rebellious time. This is actually only the second time that these two have aligned since Uranus entered Taurus a couple of years ago. And, we often kind of expect big events around this kind of alignment. First alignment was on April 22nd of 2019. So events that week was when Notre Dame burned. That was when Greta Thunberg spoke at the Extinction Rebellion protest in London. So it was one of her first exposures to the world stage. So very Sun conjunct Uranus and Taurus, saving the environment. A radical voice, a rebellious voice. It was also the week of the mudslide in the jade mine in Myanmar, and a couple of earthquakes in the Philippines that were quite large. So that was the last time that the Sun aligned with Uranus. So again, not to put fear into our hearts, but to know that these deep changes are occurring, and to basically hold our ground. Again, going back to what I said earlier, finding that place of peace within us, being the force for peace, the force for enlightenment, the force for reason. We can all each do that. And by the end of the week, Mercury is going to align with Uranus too. So kind of links this time frame to new information coming forward. Okay, let's move on to May. Again, not as many of the curlicues. Let's kind of speed this up a little bit. We've got some romantic energies at the beginning of the week, but then we've got the nodal axis shifting. So depending on whether you use a true node or the mean node, it'll shift on different days. But this is the date that I have. North node enters Gemini. We've talked about that already. This is a great day for formalizing a plan and keeping with our deepest values. Sun conjunct Mercury. The full moon, let's see, is in Scorpio. It's got a mix of aspects. It's got a positive aspect to Neptune, so opens the doors to a deeper intuitive knowing. But Mercury is also involved, and so it can be kind of hard to wrap our logical brains around the kind of information that's coming through. Saturn goes retrograde on the 10th. Again, that really strengthens Saturn's energy around that time. Serious issues may come forward. At the same time, Mercury-Jupiter trine is there, which is expansive and hopeful. So it's kind of a balance of the serious and the optimistic on that day. Got a little bit of challenges on the 11th. Mercury squaring Mars. We're not as tactful as we might want to be, a little contentious, but then things settle out a little bit better on the 12th. That is the day that Venus goes retrograde. I've got the curlicue on the 14th because that's the day that Jupiter goes retrograde. So again, that energy is increased. So if Jupiter's been, making things bigger than they seem, like the image, objects in the mirror are closer than they appear. Just remember that Jupiter does tend to magnify things. So things may seem bigger than they really are around that time. So a perfect time to be grounding. Venus retrograde throughout this time. Let's see. We may not be able to see relationships all that clearly around the 20th. That's the second Venus square Neptune. And so can be very romantic and idealistic, but it's also not the best time to purchase anything because we may not see its true value. We have our new moon on the 22nd, and that has some nice aspects with it. Mercury conjunct Venus, so can be creative, but also somewhat grounded. It's a nice energy with Sun trining Saturn. So kind of a little bit of a stabilizer. Mercury squaring Neptune, so we might be a little bit out there, but I like the stabilizing part of that Sun-Saturn trine. On the 24th, Mars conjunct Ceres, Mars square, okay. I'm going to skip over that, doesn't really grab my attention. Mercury conjunct the North Node. I think that helps us get more in sync with that evolutionary agenda that I talked about earlier. So just to feel more in alignment, to remember when we communicate about all of those ways that we're moving forward, and those tendencies that we're leaving behind. Okay, let's go skip to June. All right, so we've got a few curlicues. Let's see what we want to talk about here. Venus squaring Mars at the beginning of the week, that's kind of disagreeable. Remember that Venus is still retrograde, so might be a time when we're reviewing past relationships and not feeling the best about them. And then the Sun aligning with Venus the next day. This is very much a relationship review, kind of beginning to June. We have a lunar eclipse. We actually have 3 eclipses in June and July. This is a lunar eclipse, full moon, and then the Sun is squaring Mars the next day. So that Sun-Mars square is involved in the lunar eclipse. That's why I put the curlicue there. This is kind of an argumentative type of influence and differences of opinion. Make sure that our tactics aren't underhanded. Be careful of agreeing to anything around these times. Again, remembering also that full moons, lunar eclipses are more emotional times. I will talk about this on another slide. Let's move on for now. I think the main thing on that next week are those Neptune transits. So Neptune can be very nice, kind of on a mystical, creative way, but it also doesn't make us very grounded. And so this last half of that second week, a good time to be in a creative zone, but not necessarily to figure things out in a practical way. I have a curlicue on the 14th because this is when Pluto is squaring Eris, and then the Sun is in hard aspect to both Uranus and Pluto. So it's kind of a belligerent, rebellious, resentful kind of energy. So holding your own, paying attention again. Remember, we've got that North Node in Gemini. What do we want to bring forward about our abilities to communicate and to listen? Mercury is going to go retrograde on the 17th, so we have the next 3 weeks or so to work with that. I'm going to watch out on the 18th. We might take action driven more by our passions than really considering how they might result in our lives, what after effects there might be. But the Sun conjunct the North Node, again, getting on track, feeling on track with our evolutionary agenda. I'll talk more about the eclipse and the new moon on the next slides. Venus does go direct on the 24th, so we've completed that phase. I put a curlicue on the 26th because we've got some contentious energies. Mars is squaring the nodes, so as much as our good intentions are to be in full alignment with that evolutionary path, we're just irritated with the whole thing and we just want to be left alone and do things our own way. That's the Mars energy. And that's kind of Jupiter squaring Eris as well. So egos can get in the way of seeing a clear path, and resentments from the past, and interfere with our achieving our higher goals. The next week is the second Jupiter conjunct Pluto. So of course that's very powerful. And both planets are now retrograde, as I mentioned to you earlier. I have found that to be a very powerful time because it takes it so far inward. But it can be a time, it is that review step in the process. We can make revisions based on what's unfolded since early April. Watch being overly defensive towards the end of the month. The Sun square Chiron and some other aspects on that day. We can have some new ideas, but remember that Mercury's retrograde. So capture the insights, but hold on to them for implementing later. So lunar eclipse that was on the 5th. The main piece of this is this T-square. So a T-square happens when we've got two planets opposing each other. So of course with the full moon we have the Sun opposing the moon, but then we have the Sun very close to Venus, so Venus is in that mix as well. And then over here, so 90 degrees away from both the moon and the Sun, we have Ceres and Mars and Neptune. So this creates what's called a T-square. So we want to take very good care of ourselves at this time because this can be really stressful on the nervous system. We can be easily influenced by energies in our environment, whether it's EMF or other people. Conflicts can come forward based on belief systems and just different ways of looking at reality. We may not be feeling, with Neptune involved, we might be feeling kind of disoriented or fuzzy. Vacillation, indecision, easily sidetracked. Be careful of spreading yourself too thin. Do your best to face those challenges directly, because when we have a T-square like this, what we really want is to fill in the missing leg. So the missing leg is what would make it a full square, and that missing leg is in Virgo. So we want to look at those Virgo qualities and say, how are we going to bring this all into balance? So Virgo qualities are analysis, discernment, self-discipline. And when we apply those, we really bring this all into balance. And then we can use it in a very creative, positive, and productive way. And it really can help us bring our ideals into form. And then this next slide, this is very interesting because we have both the solar eclipse and the solstice on the same day. So right up here I have the solar eclipse chart, and right behind it I have the solstice chart. So it looks different because they've moved around. So you'll see in the solar eclipse chart, you see the sun, moon there, and then they're up here in the solstice chart. We've got, what else? Where's Saturn and Pluto? Got Saturn and Pluto over here in the eclipse chart and down here in the solstice chart. So it's the same chart, it's just rotated. So that's why I've only put one of the charts up here, because what we'll be looking at are the aspects that are involved. So this is actually a fairly strong eclipse because the sun and moon are very close to the north node, and that's actually what makes an eclipse, when sun and moon are close to the nodal axis. Sorry. So this is called a north node eclipse, which is meant to be very positive. It's meant to help us move forward and to take us into alignment with that evolutionary path. It's interesting that the sun and moon are in Cancer, north node's already in Gemini, so they're in different signs, but they're conjunct. So it sounds as if we're meant to remember everything we learned last year. You know, empathy, compassion, caring for each other, self-care, all of those Cancer lessons, and integrate them now. Maybe into how we communicate, remembering empathy and communication. So all of that's strongly involved here. We have, as a part of this, sun and moon are close to Vesta. Vesta is an asteroid that has to do with our commitment. So all of this in Cancer, there's an emphasis on our commitment to home and family and those in our lives who need our support and may need protection. Now, of course, with this being the solstice, also, it does set the theme for the next 3 months. So let's go to that. I can move that to that. Let's just remove it for a moment. So in this chart, the main aspect is between the Sun and Saturn. You can see they're both at 0 degrees of their respective signs, but it's an awkward kind of relationship here. It's something called the quincunx, because these two signs don't get along. So Cancer is all about nurturing and family and connection and all of that, and Aquarius is all about, you know, independence and social connections and, you know, out there in the world. Cancer is very home-like. So we've got, this is the main tension of the solstice chart, and then so also the main tension that we'll be dealing with for this next 3 months. So be careful about taking on responsibilities that aren't yours. That's the Saturn piece. And watch for burnout, for working too hard. Remember the self-care piece of that Sun in Cancer. Prioritize. Take care of the most important tasks first. Be okay if some things don't get done. There can be a tendency to loneliness because there's this conflict here. Well, do I allow myself to be vulnerable, or is that too scary? But as much as possible, relax and allow yourself to have time to enjoy the company of other people, especially those people with whom you feel supported, who feel like family to you. So that actually is the end of the calendars. I have one more slide that I'll end this whole thing with. I just want to give that overview of saying, yes, really powerful time. I think that theme of self-care just continues to be really strong. As we saw, not only until the nodes change in May, but then this solstice again with that North Node conjunct, the eclipse with the North Node in Gemini aligned with Sun and Moon in Cancer. It's like, no, don't forget the self-care. Don't forget the caring piece. Don't forget the empathy. Don't forget the open heart. That this continues to be really vital throughout those next 3 months. And of course, we'll have the next webinar probably at the end of June. So we'll take it from there at this point. As you saw, there's a lot going on, but we know that. You know, we've been through the tornado. Let's say that. We've been through the tornado with the Saturn-Pluto alignment. I think Jupiter can spark some spin-off tornadoes, so it's not like we can just put that behind us and remember the ripple effect of Saturn moving out. And of course, this is true. We know this is true. If we have a big change anywhere, it doesn't just happen in a day. It has continuing effects. And we know from things that have been building that are coming to kind of a high point now, a climax or a crisis. No matter how they resolve, we're going to continue to see fallout from there. And I think with Jupiter coming in, it really does bring that energy back to peak. The important thing to keep in mind is where we're going with this. Yes, things seem like they're falling apart, but that's Pluto's job. Pluto's job is to make things, to disassemble things that are no longer valuable or no longer valid or have been getting in the way of are actually achieving something important. And so to really honor that process of death and rebirth, you know, Pluto is the god of the underworld, so it's that process of death and rebirth. And always keep in mind that, you know, Pluto has the symbol of the phoenix rising from the ashes. And that to me is that image we want to hold on to. And then of course, remembering that really positive energy of Pallas Athena and how she is going to play into all of this. And I feel like that's a really powerful part too. Our last slide, I was listening to an interview a few years ago, and I think it was with Barbara Marx Hubbard, and I wrote down the quote, and I don't remember where I put it, but this is a paraphrase of it, and I think it's from Barbara. So this is the quote I want to leave you with, because I remember this from time to time. If we were to go into labor but didn't know we were about to give birth, we would think we were dying.
Mm.
That brings tears to my eyes. I don't know about you guys. So that's what I'm going to leave you with.
Yeah.
Okay, Elsie.
Okay, so Pam, thank you so much. This is wonderful. So much to take in. I want to remind everyone you're going to have a copy of the slideshow, and you'll have a Zoom video and a Zoom audio. Both the Zoom video and audio you will need to download to listen to the entire 90 minutes. Otherwise, it'll stop somewhere along the line. And also, we'll make a YouTube replay of this, so you'll have plenty of choices, and that will go out either later tonight or first thing in the morning, depending on how long it takes for the webinar to download. So we have some wonderful comments here from Andrea saying thank you, and Jan Birch, I would love to see the signs, and the new and full moons are printed on the handouts. Yes, they are. Everyone saying how wonderful this was and thanking us. So just great to be with everyone. We had an amazing group of people. Emma, everybody, Jilly saying thank you so much. So Pam, we love the way that you bring this into clear. Here's what's happened astrologically, but here's what this could mean in our life. And also going back, here's what happened in the past to give us that perspective.
Thank you, Elsie. It's
Yeah.
such a pleasure to do this. I really hope, my hope is that it's really helpful, and that and you can listen back to it from time to time and hopefully find some insights and some support. We're all going through this together, and that's one thing to keep in mind as well. And thanks everybody for coming tonight. It's a pleasure to be with you all.
Yeah.
And thank you, Elsie. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. And there's some wonderful, you can hit chat, Pam, and see all the wonderful comments yourself too.
Thank
So
you. I will do
great.
that.
So thanks everyone. And if you have any problems with downloads or what you get, just touch base with me, Elsie at wellnesswithelsie.com, or give me a call and we'll straighten it out. I'm the techie lady. Okay, Pam, have a great weekend ahead, everyone. Thanks.